170,000 people say Roundup gave them cancer. Bayer has already paid out 11 billion in settlements. Billion. And right now the Supreme Court is about to decide whether every single remaining lawsuit just disappears. I'm Rick Park, personal injury attorney here in Washington State. And what the court decides in the next few weeks could change your right to sue, not just for Roundup, but for any dangerous product.
And the wildest part is that one of the most important studies proving Roundup causes cancer came from right here in our backyard at the University of Washington.
That's right. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with Mallorie, and today we're breaking down one of the biggest product liability cases in American history and why every single person in Washington State should care about what happens next.
So, for anyone who doesn't know, Roundup is the most widely used weed killer in the world. You've probably used it in your yard. Your neighbor uses it, cities spray it in parks, it's everywhere. And the active ingredient, glyphosate, has been linked to non-Hodgkin lymphoma, a type of cancer.
That's right. And the company that makes it, first Monsanto, now Bayer, has been fighting these lawsuits for years. But instead of just settling, they went to the Supreme Court and basically asked for a get out of jail free card. Let's talk about what that means.
Yeah, so let me set the stage. So Monsanto has been selling Roundup since 1974, and for decades they've said it's safe. The EPA said it was safe. But in 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as, quote, probably carcinogenic to humans.
Yeah, and that's when the lawsuits started flooding in because people who had been using Roundup for years, landscapers and farmers, homeowners, they started getting diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And they said, Monsanto knew, they just didn't tell us.
And the evidence for that is pretty damning. The Monsanto papers, which are internal company documents that came out during litigation, they showed that Monsanto ghost wrote scientific studies, meaning they somehow participated in these studies without disclosing that they were participating, pressured the EPA, and actively worked to suppress research linking glyphosate to cancer.
Yeah, and the first big trial was Dwayne Johnson, not The Rock, but a school groundskeeper in California who sprayed Roundup regularly and was diagnosed with terminal non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The jury awarded him $289 million, and the floodgates just opened.
Yeah, since then, about 170,000 lawsuits have been filed. Bayer, who bought Monsanto in 2018 for $63 billion, which was terrible timing, has paid out nearly $11 billion in settlements so far. And in March 2026, a judge gave preliminary approval to a $7.25 billion settlement for current and future claims.
Now, here's why this matters, specifically to us here in Washington, because in 2019, researchers at the University of Washington's Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences published a meta-analysis, which is basically a comprehensive review of all the existing research. And what they found was explosive.
They looked at epidemiological studies from 2001 to 2018, including data from over 54,000 licensed pesticide applicators. And they concluded that the exposure to glyphosate does increase the risk of non-Hodgkin lymphoma by up to 41%.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big sample size. And 41% is significant. And that's our university. That's University of Washington researchers. That study's been cited in Roundup trials across the country. So when people say, where's the proof? The proof came right here in Washington State.
And it's worth noting, Washington is a huge agricultural state. Eastern Washington, the Yakima Valley, the Palouse, there are thousands of people here who have used and have been exposed to Roundup professionally for decades.
Yeah, that's right. And beyond agriculture, think about every homeowner who sprayed it in their driveway, every Parks Department employee, every landscaping crew. Glyphosate is everywhere. Okay, so here's where it gets really scary. Bayer's not just fighting these cases one by one. They went to the Supreme Court and said federal law should block all of these state law lawsuits.
Yeah, this is a legal concept called federal preemption. So, for the non lawyers watching, let me break it down. The argument goes like this: the EPA approved Roundup and said no cancer warning was needed. Therefore, Bayer says if individual states or juries require a cancer warning, that conflicts with federal law. And under the Supremacy Clause, federal law wins.
So basically, Bayer's saying because the EPA said our product was safe, you can't sue us in state court for failing to warn you it might cause cancer, even if it does in fact cause cancer.
And the Solicitor General actually agreed with Bayer that FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, preempts these failure to warn claims.
Yeah, that's a mouthful. Now, Mallorie, you went to Stanford Law. When you hear federal preemption applied this broadly, what's your reaction?
Rick, it's terrifying, honestly, because if the court rules in Bayer's favor, it doesn't just affect Roundup. It sets a precedent, right? That any company whose product gets federal regulatory approval could argue they are immune from state law failure to warn claims. This includes pharmaceuticals, medical devices, pesticides, chemicals. The implications of this are enormous.
Yeah, and I want to be clear about what this really means for regular people. In Washington state, your right to sue for a product that hurts you comes from state tort law. So our consumer protection statutes like Washington Product Liability Act give you the right to hold manufacturers accountable. So if the Supreme Court says that federal approval overrides that, a huge piece of our legal protection just evaporates.
So the oral arguments for this case were April 27th. The justices seemed divided, and so we're expecting a decision before the end of June.
Yeah, so let's talk about what you should actually do with this information. First, if you or someone you love has been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma and you've had significant exposure to Roundup, you may have a claim. The $7.25 billion settlement is still being finalized. The window's not closed quite yet.
So a key question to ask yourself is, did you regularly use Roundup at home, at work, on a farm, in landscaping? Were you exposed over a period of months or years to this product? And have you been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin lymphoma or another type of lymphatic cancer?
Yeah, and here in Washington specifically, remember, we have a 3-year statute of limitations under RCW 4.16.080 for personal injury claims. But for cases like this, where you might not connect the dots right away, there's something called the discovery rule, and that may apply, meaning that the clock starts when you knew or should have known the product caused your injury, but that clock may be a shorter time.
Yeah, and I want to talk about one other bigger point, which is we should all be watching what the Supreme Court does in June. Because, like I said earlier, if they rule for Bayer on preemption, it's not just Roundup victims that could lose. It could affect anyone in Washington who gets hurt by a federally regulated product and wants to sue under state law.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we talk about these cases on this channel. It's because the laws do change. Your rights can expand or shrink based on what the 9 people in Washington, D.C. decide. And most people don't find out until it's too late. So if you think you might have a Roundup claim or you've been hurt by any product and you're not sure what to do, give us a call. Chenaur Injury Lawyers. We give free consultations. We've recovered hundreds of $millions for our clients, have over 450 5-star reviews. We're in Federal Way, Tacoma, and Everett.